It's amazing to be here with you guys. I was praying for this morning, and I really felt God say these words to me, that when you leave, you're not saying goodbye, but you're saying, we will see you soon. You see, because my faith, I believe that there was going to be a time where we're going to have more services here. We're going to see students won to Christ, and we're going to see students change and transform. So what we're doing this morning is we're making a statement into the heavenly realms to say, God, that our faith is that we're going to do whatever it takes to reach out to these students. So when I leave this morning, I'm not saying goodbye, but I'm saying I'll see you soon. And so I want to thank you for being part of this. This is not just a young adult movement thing. This is not just a student thing. This is a church-wide thing. And I want to thank you for making the time, even for paying for the car park, for coming out here and making the sacrifice. So I thank you for the church family. Thank you so much. And I just want to speak on a message that God has put on my heart. I'm not going to try to speak too long, but okay. So I pray that before I start, I just want to say, I pray as I always do, that you will apply this word into your day-to-day context. That you'll be able, when you go away from this, to hear the word and actually put it into practice. And I want to read from 2 Kings chapter 6. 2 Kings chapter 6. Verses 1 to 6. 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 to 6. If you didn't bring your Bible, it should be on the screen as well. But 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 1 to 6 says, Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, See, the place where we dwell under your charge is too small for us. Let us go to the Jordan, and each of us get there a log, and let us make a place for us to dwell there. And he answered, Go. Then one of them said, Be pleased to go with your servants. And he answered, I will go. So he went with them. And when they came to the Jordan, they cut down trees. But as one was felling a log, his axe head fell into the water, and he cried out, Alas, my master, it was borrowed. Then the man of God said, Where did it fall? When he showed him the place, he cut off a stick and threw it in there and made the iron float. And he said, Take it up. So he reached out his hand and he took it up. This morning, I want to speak on the title, Stick Through It. Stick through it. Have you ever been in a situation where you've lost something important and you thought, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to stick through this situation? I'm sure we've all been in that place at one time in our life where we've lost something. We thought, how can I get through this? Now, most of us here have smartphones. We have a Samsung, an Android, or an iPhone. And we use that phone to text. We use that phone to call. We use that for our emails, the internet, for social media. And if we lost that phone, most of us would admit that it'd be quite hard to carry on. And you may remember me telling this story, but there was one time where I lost my phone. I was going to the park with my brother, and I put my phone in my pocket, and I didn't have any zip, so as I was running in the park, my phone fell out. When I went home, I was looking for my phone and I couldn't find it. And that's because I didn't have zips, and so it fell out. Now, I know this isn't life or death, but to me, my phone is important. It's how I have all my meetings. I put it on my calendar. It has access to my bank accounts. It has access to my emails. It's how I do my job. It's how I text the youth and the young adults. So when I lost my phone, I was worried. I was looking everywhere in my room for my phone because I needed my phone. I didn't just need it for my life personally, but I also needed it to do my job. And if I was being honest, I felt a little bit lost without my phone. And after searching for a couple hours, I came to the conclusion that my phone was lost. And it was in that moment I felt a little bit hopeless. Have you ever lost something maybe more important than a phone? And you felt hopeless. You felt a little bit lost, and you thought, how can I get through this? And this is what we see in 2 Kings chapter 6. It says that the prophets were cutting down a tree, and one of the prophets loses his axe head. At that moment, he must have felt hopeless, wondering, how am I going to get through this? But as we read that, I question, why was the prophet cutting a tree? Well, at the beginning of the chapter, the prophets go to Elisha and they say, the place where we are living is too small. Let us go and build a bigger house. They felt a bit cramped at where they were living, so they wanted to live in a bigger house. And I noticed there's frustration inside of them because where they are staying is too small. There's a frustration in boiling inside of them because they want to live in a larger house. They want to do something bigger. Have you ever been in that position where you are right now just seems a bit small? Where you are right now almost seems like it's containing you. You feel a bit squashed, maybe even limited. That you feel like there is more inside of you. God, I can give more. God, I can do more. And it can be frustrating to try and operate in something that doesn't seem big enough. A house is where you go to live. It's where you go to dwell. It's where you go daily. The prophets would have been reminded on a daily basis that where they were living was too small. And it can be so frustrating to go somewhere daily and be reminded daily that what you are doing is limiting you. It can be so hard to go to that job and feel like that job is not challenging you. It can be hard to look at your bank account and feel like you don't have enough finances. Hard that you feel like you're not really doing all that you're supposed to be doing and you feel like there is more and now you're frustrated. But what I've noticed about frustration is that frustration can be an indicator to change. That actually, it's good to have a healthy sense of frustration. A frustration that challenges us to change. A frustration that challenges us into something more, into something deeper. The prophets had a healthy frustration to say, yes, where we are living is good, but there has to be more. What are you frustrated about this morning? Could it be that your frustration is an indicator that God has something bigger for you? That where you are right now is too small, so He is drawing you into a place of frustration in order to prepare you for change. That God is stirring something inside of you to thrust you into change, but change requires action. In fact, healthy frustration should lead you into action. Now, when I say healthy frustration, I mean frustration that is driven by godly motives. Frustration that is driven by God. Because not all frustration is godly frustration. It's possible to have frustrations that are driven by selfish motives. And frustration that's not driven by God can often lead us to complain and be cynical. But godly, healthy frustration is uniquely designed by God to bring us into change, to bring us into action, to move into something that God has for us. And this is what we see with the prophets. They're frustrated, so they said, let me go and build a bigger house. And can I tell you this morning that progression will always require action. Progression will always require action. That if you want to move into what God has for you, it's going to take you to act. But this can be a problem for many of us because we live in a society where a lot of things are done for us and it requires minimal effort. But if we're going to see a change, we have to move. It's good to have dreams and aspirations, but those dreams must then be implemented. There has to be work put in. This is why at the beginning of the message, I encouraged you to apply this word into your day-to-day context, to put it into practice. And even in James says to the readers, don't just be hearers of the word, but be doers. There's an emphasis not just to hear, but to do. Because we are blessed not just by the word that we hear, but by the word we act upon, what we put into practice. But the problem for many of us, including myself, is that we can get frustrated but take no action. That we can get frustrated about that job, maybe frustrated about our marriage, about that situation, and then we just sit there and we complain. We sit in our frustration, in our bitterness, in our anger, and we say, God, why didn't you take action? But God was waiting for us to take action. And until we take action and take that first step, God won't bring us into the next. And so we have a choice to make. Will we stay in our frustration, or will we take action? What action is God requiring of you this morning? And so the prophets, the action that was required of the prophets to build this bigger house was they had to cut down some trees. They had to cut down some trees. And I find it so interesting that in order to get something bigger, they had to take something away. They had to take something down. That there was these trees that were standing in their way of their progression. There was an obstacle to their progression. And there will always be an obstacle to our progression, but we decide, will that obstacle remain an obstacle, or will we use it as our stepping stone? And the longer I go on with my walk with God, the more I realize God will draw me into a place of frustration to move me into action so that I will remove some things in my life in order to prepare for the greater that He has. Amen? Are you out there? Yes. He will move me into action to remove some things in order to prepare for the greater that He has for me. The prophets had to cut down some trees in order to move forward. What they needed for their progression was right in front of them, but they had to cut it down. What they needed was right in front of them, but they had to cut it down. What if God wants you to move, but it's going to require you to cut some things down? Maybe to cut that gossiping away. Maybe to cut that negative mindset. Maybe those wrong motives. That when we remove one thing, we make room for God to bring us something else. We make room for God to bring us something else. And this is what I find so amazing. That the trees that the prophets cut down were the very same trees that they used to build the house. In other words, what was being removed was being used to build. What was being removed was being used to build. And when we take action and remove what God has asked us to remove, God will always use the remnants of that decision for our elevation. God will always use the remnants of that decision for our elevation. This is the principle of God, that when we sacrifice what He has asked us to sacrifice, it is that sacrifice that becomes the stepping stone. It is that sacrifice that becomes the building blocks. It is that sacrifice that God uses to propel us into the next step. That when we respond in action, God responds too. God responds too. That when we decide to cut away our anger and our pride, God will use that to heal our relationships. When we decide to cut away hours of TV and Netflix to spend time with Him, God will use that time to strengthen our relationship with Him. That when we say, God, I'm deciding to take action and I'm going to remove what is in the way, God will use that decision to move us into our next step. What if this morning there's an obstacle in your way, but God is wondering, are you willing to remove it? Are you willing to cut it? That when we respond in action, God responds too, and it is that action that is our elevation into the next step. What is God asking you to remove? So the prophets are cutting down trees to make space for their new, bigger house. And as they were cutting down trees, one of the prophets' axe head fell off. And he's worried and he cries out. He says, oh no, I've lost my axe head. He said, this was borrowed. He is now stressed out. He is now panicking. He is now worried. He was working. He was putting his frustration into practice. He was doing the right thing, but now he has lost his axe head. And we can be like that. We can be doing the right thing. We can be working and we can lose what we were doing. In a moment, it can seem like we can lose our peace. In a moment, it can seem like we lose our joy. in a moment, it can seem like we lose our hope. We were trying to do the right thing. We were trying to stay on the right path, but in a moment, it almost feels like everything goes wrong. With one stroke, with one incident, this prophet loses his axe head. And now he is worried. But at first glance, you may ask yourself, why is this prophet worried? It's just an axe head, right? This isn't life or death, is it? Well, maybe one of the reasons he's worried is because this axe head was borrowed. This axe head wasn't even his. Now, we don't know where he got it from, but what we do know is that it wasn't his. He didn't own this axe head. And it's one thing to lose something that it's yours, but it's another thing when you lose something that was borrowed. Who here has ever lost something that was borrowed? Anyone want to be brave? Yes. And maybe you can understand this then, that when you lose something that is borrowed, you feel guilty. You have to own up to it. Because if this man had lost his axe head, well, he just deals with himself. But now that he's lost another person's axe head, he has to deal with someone else. Now he is responsible for what he has lost. This is why I never really let my sister use my phone. Or really anything for that matter. But I never let her use my phone because she has a tendency to break every single phone she gets. Right? So me and my family, for her birthday this year, she had broken like 2 or 3 phones before, and normally in the first week of getting them. And me and my family thought, okay, let's chip in. We bought her a phone for her birthday, and literally within a couple days, she dropped it and almost cracked the screen. She listened and bought a screen protector. The screen protector broke, but she cracked it within the couple of days of getting it. She has a tendency to break every phone she gets, which is why I'm always worried to let her use my phone. But on the odd occasion that I let her use my phone for a selfie, I say to her, if you lose it or you damage it, you have to pay me back. You have to pay me back. And maybe this prophet is worried because he's lost something that was borrowed and now he has to pay it back. Now there is a cost attached to what he has lost. And it can be worrying to lose something that was borrowed, but it's even more troubling when you know that there is a cost attached to what you have lost. And that cost, that consequence can eat at you. God, how can I pay for the bills when I've just lost my job? God, how can I continue on in my course when I've just failed that exam? God, how can I carry on and now there's a cost attached to what I have just lost? This man has lost his axe head and now there's a cost attached. And what makes it more worse is that he didn't even choose to do this. It's not like he purposely tried to lose the axe head. And now because of a situation he didn't purposely do, he has to pay the price. And it can be hard to move forward in life when you have to deal with a situation that you didn't even choose for. You didn't choose to lose that job. You didn't choose to lose that loved one. You didn't choose for that situation, but now you have to deal with the cost attached. What do you do when you have to deal with the cost attached to losing something important? What do you do? So maybe this prophet is worried because he's lost a borrowed axe and now he has to pay for it. But maybe he's also worried because he's lost the axe head that was going to help him cut down the trees to make a bigger house. You see, he's lost the very tool to progression. The axe head is his cutting edge. His axe head is the thing that's going to chop down the trees. It's the thing that's going to give him ability greater than his ability on his own. It's what's going to help him take down those trees and move forward. But now he's lost his axe head. Think about it. Now all he has is just a stick. He can try and cut down trees, but nothing's going to happen with just a stick. And now he's left in the same place as when he started, left in his frustration. Frustrated because he was trying to make progression, but now he can't go any further because he's lost the very tool that was going to help him progress. He's lost the most important means to his breakthrough. His breakthrough was dependent on his axe head, but now he's lost his axe head. He's not going to be able to find breakthrough with just the stick. He needs the axe head. And how frustrating can it be, and how saddening can it be when you feel you don't have the tools to progression? How saddening can it be when you feel like you've lost the very thing that was going to help you move forward into what God had called you to do? Into what God had called you to do. How can you move forward? What does that axe head represent to some of you this morning? What is the cutting edge that you feel you've lost and you can't progress without? Maybe there are some of you here this morning and you feel like you've lost your love for your husband or your wife. And now you're wondering, how can I move forward in my marriage? Maybe there's some of you here and you feel like you've lost your peace. And now you're moving in fear, doubt, and worry. Or maybe there's some of you here, that axe head represents your passion for God. You've lost your passion and now you're wondering, how can I continue in my walk with God? What does the axe head represent to you this morning? I'm sure the axe head could represent many things. But in order to move forward, we need to understand, how did we lose the axe head in the first place? Well, when I was looking at axes and doing my research, I realized that axes require a lot of care and maintenance. That if you want to keep the axe sharp, you got to cover it with oil so it doesn't rust. In fact, the more you use the axe, the more maintenance it requires, daily maintenance, or else it will get damaged. And we know that the prophet was cutting down trees when he lost the axe head. He wasn't doing something out of the ordinary, but he was using the axe for what it was intended to be used. So, how did he lose it? What happened? Let's take a moment. I mean, I guess it's possible. Like, it's possible that maybe this prophet is stronger than we think. And he hit the tree so hard, and with that one hit, it knocked the axe head off. I guess maybe that's possible. Or what if the prophet didn't really know how to use the axe head? Maybe he wasn't trained, so in one hit, because he hit it in a weird way, maybe the axe head fell off. I mean, we don't really know for sure what the exact reason is, but I want to propose something a little bit different to you this morning. I want to propose something. What if it wasn't the big hit that knocked off the axe? But what if it was the consistent hit after hit? You see, the more you use an axe, the more the axe head is liable to fall off, especially when you don't take care of it. So what if it was in the routine, in the ordinary, that this axe head fell off? What if it was while the prophet, in his routine, while he was chopping the tree, that he wasn't really taking care of the axe head, and now finally, consistently, after these hits after hits, the axe head fell off? And sometimes we can fall into the trap to think that it's the big things that will knock us down, but often it is the consistent daily struggles that eat at us. And the danger is to think that it's the big things that will catch us, but it's the daily routines in life, the things that we don't look after. Just like the prophet, we didn't choose to lose our axe head, but now, because we didn't take care of it, it's lost. And if we fail to take care of what is right in front of us, we will lose it. was what was in the routine, in the mundane, that when we forget to take care of it, before we recognize it, we will lose what is right in front of us. Before we can recognize it, we will lose the means to our progression. It was in the routine. While the prophet was chopping the tree, before he could recognize it, before he could stop it, his axe head fell off. This axe head that was made of iron, this axe head that was heavy, it fell into the water and it went to the bottom. And there was no way of getting it back. And maybe this morning you feel heavy. You feel like you're in a burdened situation, stuck at the bottom, feeling like there is no way out. Well, I want to encourage you, because as I always say, with God there is always hope. Who knows that? Amen? Yes? With God there is always hope. This prophet thought that there was no way of recovering his axe head. But he cries out to Elisha, and Elisha does something weird. Elisha does something strange. It says that Elisha took a stick and he threw it into the water. And when the stick fell into the water, it says the axe head came back up. This axe head that was so heavy, this axe head that was stuck at the bottom, has now come back up to the top. When the stick was thrown into the water, the axe head started to float. So what does this stick represent? Well, it's interesting that in Exodus chapter 15, Moses is taking the people of Israel out. They come to a piece of water and they want to drink it, but they can't because it's bitter. So God tells Moses to take a piece of wood and throw it into the water. When he throws it into the water that was bitter has now become sweet. And the word for wood is derived from the same root word as the word stick in 2 Kings 6. In other words, there's a connection between these incidences. There's a connection between these words. And this reminded me of what Jesus did for us. What was the cross made out of? Wasn't the cross made out of wood? Well, what does the cross represent? It represents Jesus. It represents where he took our place. The cross represents when Jesus took on our sin and our mistakes, and he went to the bottom and he said that I'm gonna go to the bottom so that you don't have to stay down in the depths of despair. That I'm gonna bring you victory so you don't have to stay down in your fear, in your doubts, in your worries. Jesus came to recover that which was lost. He came to recover that which was lost. And when Elisha was recovering the axe head, he goes to the place where it was lost and he throws the stick, the place that seemed hopeless. And the axe head that was so heavy has now come back to the top. What situation are you in that feels heavy? What situation are you in that feels hopeless? Maybe you're here this morning and you've lost something that is so important to you and you don't feel like you can go on. You're in a place where you're stressed, where you're worried, maybe even heartbroken. Maybe this morning you've lost your axe head. What represents that peace? What represents hope, joy, confidence? Maybe you're here and you've lost your passion and your purpose and you're wondering, how can I keep moving forward? How can I keep moving forward? Well, I want to encourage you, if you would just stick through it, if you would just stick through it, if you would make a commitment to say, God, I'm not giving up and I'm gonna go back to the place where I lost it. And instead of doing it on my own, God, I invite you into my situation. That if we would invite him into our situation, he would bring that which was lost back up. That we don't have to stay at the bottom, but we can regain what we have lost. But it requires us to take a step of action, to invite him into our situation. I'm just wondering if we could bow our heads and close our eyes. Maybe there's some of you here and you feel like you've lost your axe head, your cutting edge. Maybe you don't even know God, but you're just in this situation and you feel like I'm stuck. I want to leave with this final note as our eyes are closed. It's interesting that as Elisha threw the stick, it was almost like immediately the axe head came back to the top. It was like the axe head that was at the bottom was attracted to the stick. And when Jesus died on the cross, he died to take our place. And so when we call out to him, when we lift his name, it says that he will draw all men to him. That when we call out to him, it's like he's attracted to when we call out to him. That this is the message of the cross, that Jesus took our place. He went to the bottom of the depths of despair so that we can rise up in victory. But it requires us to take a step and invite him into our situation. So with every head bowed and eyes closed, I want to ask you to respond. If you're here this morning and you feel like you've lost your axe head, you feel like you've lost something important, and maybe you're wondering, how am I going to move forward? I just want you to raise your hand and put it back down. If you want to respond.